I am presenting on the recent remote sensing applications in the fields of forest biodiversity and ecology. First, I would like to define the 4 definitions which are very much important to understand the varied applications of the remote sensing data in applying in these fields. The forestry is the science and art of planting, managing, conserving, and restoring forests and associated resources for human and environmental benefits. Forest ecosystems are the major ecological units that exist as a part of the total complex ecology. So it means the forest is not only the study of the forest, it is having the multiple roles in giving a more environmental benefits for the human society. So there is an intervention and there is an expertise from the group of experts from forestry, maybe like resource managers or the researchers. They are working on development of and as well as the conservation of the forests. Then second, the ecology. It deals with the study of how organisms interact with one another and with their physical environment. In the field of ecology, we have 4 main branches. One is organism level ecology, population ecology, community, and ecosystem. Then third one is the biodiversity. Similar to like forestry and ecology, it is again the interdisciplinary or the multidisciplinary science. The definition of biodiversity means is the biodiversity availability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are a part. So similarly, like in ecology, we have organism ecology, population ecology, community, and ecosystem ecology. In the field of biodiversity also, we have to study the biodiversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. The major focus of biodiversity is on 3 attributes. One is the taxonomic diversity. It deals about the varying levels of the composition from like species level to the biosphere level. Then structural diversity. It deals about the patterns. And the third one is the functional biodiversity. It provides us more relevant information on ecosystem or ecological processes and the disturbances which are affecting the structure and the taxonomic diversity. The most important one is the remote sensing. The remote sensing is the science and art of acquiring information about the Earth's surface without actually being in contact with it. This is done by sensing and recording reflected or emitted energy and processing and analyzing that information. So this science of remote sensing actually began in 1858. The initial attempts were with aerial photos of Paris taken from a hot air balloon. But later, during the World War time, these aeroplanes or aircrafts took the place of balloons, and by the Cold War era, by the spy satellites, both Corona by USA and Zenith by Russia. During the 1950s, it was a need to define the various imaging capabilities from the multispectral cameras as well as the infrared films, and there is no unique term for the field of this science. So Miss Evelyn Pruitt, US Navy scientist, she has coined the new name for this field of science as a remote sensing. However, I said like in World War I and World War II, as well as in Cold War era, much of the focus of the satellite-based remote sensing is for the not for civilian purposes. It's mostly for the defense, and it's for exclusively for the natural resource management. But from 1970 onwards, the USA started its Landsat program. It was the assessment and of the natural resources from 1972. Later, tremendous development in the technology, resolution, and then spatial resolution as well as the radiometric resolution. Now we have a series of Landsat satellites and also a series of IRS satellites, and they are supporting our monitoring and management of the natural resources. And in the last 5 decades, like from 1970s to this date, this remote sensing technology has come a very long way. And there were many new techniques, new methodologies, and new applications were added. And the society is getting a benefit of the applications of the remote sensing to fulfill our day-to-day requirements, and also to derive a plans for long-term conservation of the resources. And the remote sensing became very popular in ecology by providing 3 important informations data sets. One is for the land cover classification. By doing the land cover classification, we are getting the information on the spatial arrangement of different land cover types and also the characteristics of the Earth's surface environment that can be used to identify a specific habitats and also to predict the distribution of both species as well as the plant or animal communities. Then, regard to the functional diversity, the ecosystem measurements which were derived through the remote sensing, they provide the more realistic and precise information to derive the information on like leaf area index and the net primary productivity. The third important field of ecological remote sensing is the change detection. So now we have the multi-temporal images, time series images, high temporal data from the various sensors. So by applying this past data as well as the recent data, we can able to do a change detection and the analysis. That will give us a more clear information on various ecological parameters, specifically like in the fields of the climate change, deforestation or habitat loss, fragmentation, or in other related aspects, the change detection plays a primary role. So what types of remote sensing data is available for the forest resources as well as assessment of the biodiversity? We have various sensors from different space agencies, like from NASA, you have MODIS and Landsat. Hello. Yeah, from NASA, you have MODIS, Landsat, and from European Space Agency, you have Sentinel series of satellites. And from the ISRO, Indian Remote Sensing Program, we have the IRS series of satellites. So like AVIPS, it provides the information at 56-meter spatial resolution. LIS-3, which provides the data at 23.5 meter resolution. LIS-4 provides the data on 5.8 meter resolution. And the Cartosat are providing 1 meter and also better than 1 meter spatial resolution. And the advantage of having all these kinds of spatial resolutions, spectral resolutions, and high temporal data is that we can able to monitor the habitats as well as the Earth's surface environment almost on a near real time, and we can make prescriptions or interventions to improve the natural resources, so that will fulfill the target of the sustainable forest management. So what are the applications? We have n number of applications. Here I have listed only a few. One is that the mapping of land use and land cover, mapping of the vegetation, and the quantification of forest cover and its distribution, mapping of the vegetation types, discrimination of communities and species, and relating of the multi-source remote sensing data in understanding the relationship between vegetation and climate. And as now we have like MODIS kind of data, which provides the data almost on a near real time on daily basis. So we can use the data in understanding the global vegetation phenology. And now we have the Sentinel-2 satellite data that provides the revisit data at every 5-day interval with a 10-meter resolution. So like now from MODIS, you have 250-meter resolution. From Sentinel-2, we have the 10-meter kind of resolution. So we can able to assess the different phases of the vegetation phenology that will help us in understanding the vegetation health. And also there are several studies, they have applied the both data sets from field as well as from the remote sensing data in quantifying the biomass levels in forest. And further, there are many studies that applied the remote sensing data in assessing the carbon pools as well as the fluxes. And there are studies even in dealing the using of remote sensing in the biogeochemical heterogeneity or biogeochemical cycles like carbon cycle. And there are many programs now they are depending on the remote sensing data to support the disaster management. So the remote sensing is providing almost a near real-time or daily based data to address the major disasters like the fires. Then there are many applications there. The remote sensing data was being utilized in addressing the ecosystem services and also in identifying the biologically significant areas. So this concept of the biologically significant areas and the conservation became prominent since 1992 Convention on Biological Diversity Summit. There now the major focus of all the countries is to identify the biologically significant or the biodiversity rich areas for the conservation. And for the perspective of the wildlife management, we need to characterize the habitat condition, status, as well as the habitat improvement or the degradation. In this context also, the remote sensing with the support of the geographic information system help us in identifying the zones which are suitable for the wildlife and other species. And earlier, from like in 2005 onwards, the global climate experts, they identified the different kinds of the essential climate variables. And for this understanding and the reporting of the change in the climate, now we are depending on the remote sensing, which is providing more than 30 essential climate variables. Like we are getting a daily information, like daily scale, weekly, monthly, annual to decadal scale of data is available now to understand the information. So that will help us in identifying the impact of the climate change on vegetation and also to go for a climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. So some of the essential climate variables are the net radiation, land surface temperature, sea surface temperature, then land surface temperature anomaly, sea surface temperature anomaly, rainfall, snow cover, cloud fraction, cloud properties, and different kinds of information vertically from like the concentration of carbon monoxide or aerosols, then the water vapor. So these are the important essential climate variables which are required for understanding and for addressing the various issues related to the climate. So now from 2013 onwards, the researchers also found that the biodiversity is one of the important biological phenomena. So here also they found that the remote sensing has a major role in addressing the various global biodiversity conservation targets. So now the trend is also now moving towards from essential climate variables to the essential biodiversity variables. And how the scientists have identified the biodiversity variables. The focus of the variables is to assess, monitor, and report the change in biodiversity. So now we have many number of variables, but we need not to go for each and every variable. They may not have the high importance in addressing the change in biodiversity. So the expert group was formed under the leadership of Pereira. They have the group of experts from remote sensing, science policy, ecology, and from the engineers. So as they considered the remote sensing is the technology which is going to provide the more details on the biodiversity. So they have considered the 4 criteria in identifying the biodiversity variables. One is the relevance of this technology and feasibility of this technology to map different variables on regular basis. and the accuracy of the products, then the maturity of the remote sensing technology. So after going through this criteria and by having this expertise from the various disciplines, they identified the 6 classes of essential biodiversity variables. We have now 6 essential biodiversity variable classes, starting from like genetic composition, species populations, species traits, community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function. Among these 6, the genetic composition is not related to the this space-based remote sensing. However, the remote sensing has a direct role in capturing and providing the information on the community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function. By integrating the in situ measurements from field and with the different sensor data, we can also address the species distribution, vegetation canopy height, and other plant functional traits. So now this technology is growing very rapidly and providing the information on various biodiversity variables. So this is the status that in 2013 this publication was in Science. And very recently in 2021, Skidmore et al. They have came up with the 30 biodiversity metrics to observe from space. So based on the technological advancement, maturity of the science, and the feasibility through remote sensing, they identified the 30 variables as the major metrics to be derived through the space-based remote sensing. So among these 30, like the land cover mapping and monitoring is one of the important metric that will provide us the overall status of the natural resources. Then by applying the very high resolution data or 3-dimensional data from radar, also we can able to generate the canopy profiles that provides us the data on the plant area index. So similarly, we can now are in a position to generate various biodiversity products related to the fraction of vegetation cover, ecosystem level fragmentation, forest canopy height or vegetation height, above ground biomass information, and to address the carbon cycle, net primary productivity, fire disturbance, leaf area index, vegetation phenology, and the information of the different habitats in terms of like the ecosystem structural variance, species abundance, population density. Like that, we have the 30 important biodiversity metrics. Now we can generate through the remote sensing. Hereafter, I would like to touch upon some of the major applications of the remote sensing. The remote sensing became very popular by addressing the issue of the deforestation. Later, as India is also one of the country which was signed in Convention on Biological Diversity. So this forest cover became one of the major agenda of the different countries. So the remote sensing is providing the very important information. As of now, the Forest Survey of India is mapping the India's forest cover at every 2 years interval by utilizing the IRS list 3 data. And now here I would like to show the how change appears in the imagery. So this is the false color composite 1975, and then I am showing the 2013 image. So once you observe the animation, you could able to identify that the majority of the areas which were earlier are like a pristine forest are now became highly fragmented and also shown a large scale deforestation. So by applying a different classification procedures, we can able to estimate the change in forest cover that will give us information both on deforestation as well as then afforestation. So what is the classification method to be utilized? The earlier we have the majority of the satellite data sets are from coarse resolution like 250 meter, 500 meter or 1 kilometer, and then like 56 meter and 23.5 meter medium resolution data sets. So earlier the attempts were to categorize the land cover or forest types or forest classes by using a pixel-based classification methods. But later, from 2001 onwards, the commercial era of satellites had begun with the Iconos, QuickBird, and later with the WorldView 1, 2, 3, as well as GOI. We have now all types of data with different resolutions. But to work with the high resolution images, we need to have the segmentation techniques or object-based image analysis. Like initially, like the development is, initially we are only working with the visual image interpretation. There we are manually mapping water, agriculture, forest, and the classes within it. But later, there is a tremendous technological advancement in having the vegetation indices. Earlier, we have the only like normalized difference vegetation index. Now we have several indices like the enhanced vegetation index, soil adjusted vegetation index, and similarly there are many other indices. They are helping us in understanding the vegetation condition and the vegetation health. Then the object-based image analysis, as I said, to group the different pixels into the objects, and this is the best possible way of the classification of the high resolution images. So there we'll get the more accuracy as compared with the pixel-based classifiers. The difference here is that the object-based image analysis takes care of both spectral information as well as the textural details. So it means it is almost working in similar to the visual interpretation. In visual interpretation also, generally we'll consider like tone, texture, spectral information, and association. So here also in object-based image analysis, we can able to generate the hierarchical level of information, and that will be useful in addressing the issues at local scale. So here I have shown one methodological approach that how we are getting a thematic information from the high resolution images. So first we have to define the mapping approach. And while defining the mapping approach, we have to consider the several parameters like the characteristics of the satellite data to be used. For example, our interest is to map the tree cover and to detect the trees. There we have to use the very high spatial resolution data. But our approach is to have the regional assessment of forest cover or forest types. Then we can make use of the medium resolution data. And then finally, we have to have the map with certain specifications. So we need to define the minimum mappable unit by considering the spectral resolution, spatial resolution, and also the radiometry of the satellite imagery. And also, we have to take a decision that we have to classify the entire area in a one go, or we have to stratify the area into different zones. For example, in India, we have like 10 biogeographic zones like Himalaya, Western Ghats, Gangetic Plains, arid zone, semi-arid zone, islands, and coasts. If you are classifying the entire imagery with one type of approach, you may not get the very reliable results. So better to consider the stratification approach because the vegetation condition are like the peak green season or length of growing season, leaf onset or leaf offset, they may be different from one biogeographic zone to other biogeographic zone. So we need to have some kind of strata in before classifying the entire study area. So the geographical stratification is one of the major approach. There you are dividing the study area into smaller areas so that each strata can be processed independently by applying the various ecological principles or the rule basis. Then the approach for the classification. As now we have the very high resolution images, the pixel-based classification may not be sufficient because it will only take into consideration of the spectral properties. That will not take into consideration of the texture of the imagery. So as the very high resolution images are having the more information precisely, here you have more pixels for the objects. So now in the image segmentation approach, we are dealing with the range of scales within a single image. Like you have the pixels in the bottom, then sub-objects at level 1 and super objects like level 2. So similarly, you can build such type of trees and you can generate the information at like forest cover level, type level, density level, community level, as well as the species level. So by applying this kind of a approach. So one of the most commonly used segmentation approach is the multi-resolution segmentation. It is also known as a general image segmentation. Then once you have selected the image segmentation approach, we have to concentrate on the feature identification and the selection. So it means now we are identifying the training sets to classify the entire imagery. So again, depending on our study purpose, we have to go with one single date imagery, or we have to incorporate the multi-date or multi-temporal imageries. So again, your training sets or the ideas would be different for the single imagery and to the multiple data sets. Then the classification. So to improve the classification, we can make use of the multiple types of data. So here, as now we have the several machine learning approaches like the random forest. The algorithm automatically formulates the rules from the data. So it will do both classification as well as the regression. And the unselected data integration is maybe a optional step. So like if you want to make the difference like evergreen forest and deciduous forest, and you want to identify based on the climate. So now you added the climatic zones like tropical, subtropical, temperate and alpine. So you can able to identify the type of vegetation within a climate. So that will give more information in understanding the climatic level categories and also at the phenological level of categories. Then as by following the standard procedures in GIS or in the image processing, we have to do the post classification processing, and finally we have to evaluate the accuracy of the product. So these are the maps which were derived from the multi-source data. There we have mapped the forest cover by utilizing a different sensor. For example, in 1930s, we don't have any satellite imagery. So there we have utilized the topographical maps and we have visually interpreted the forest cover. So that is appears in terms of greenwash in the topographical maps. From 1972 onwards, we have the satellite data sets for mapping of the natural resources. So we took the advantage of the available satellite imageries in open access domain. And also we have utilized our own Indian remote sensing satellite data in mapping of this forest cover and the distribution. So now you can see that the forest cover information is available from the 1930s to the recent time period. So here I have shown the distribution of the forest cover in a fractional grid form. So the distribution of forest cover was shown in a 5 km into 5 km grid level. So what is the outcome? So once you have the information from the long-term satellite images, we can able to make the complete assessment on long-term, decadal, as well as the annual scale of assessment. So here I'm showing one of the product which was generated by utilizing the 1930 and 2014 data. So this map is clearly showing the areas which have affected by the large scale deforestation. And if you see like the coastal part of West Coast, as well as the Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Northeast India, and the parts of Jammu and the foothills of the Himalayas have undergone a major loss, forest cover loss. And then this is one type of assessment that will give an idea that what is the total loss of forest cover in the last 8 decades. Then as all the countries have committed and agreed for the conservation of the forest resources, so now we have to show the satellite-based mapping as a evidence to show the changes in the forest cover. So this graph clearly shows that the trend of the rate of deforestation at annual scale in India as well as for South Asian countries. If you see, like from 1930 to 1975, the annual rate of deforestation was almost like more than 0.6 for many countries. And once if you compare from 1995 onwards, the majority of the countries are showing the decreasing trend of the deforestation. So it means the countries are now very much successful in conservation of the forest cover in their geographical boundaries. But only the two countries like the Myanmar and the Bangladesh, they're still showing the increasing trend of the deforestation. And the another potential application of these data sets is that once you have generated the time series data, you have the advantage of the various spatial analyst tools and the GIS techniques. They will help us in identifying and predicting the change in forest cover. So by having this data, we can able to predict the forest cover for the past and also for the future. There are a number of models are available to predict or forecast the change in the forest scenario. So the important drivers mainly to be considered are like the topography in terms of slope, aspect and elevation, and the proximity to roads and the settlements and the proximity to water. And once you identify the major drivers, later you can utilize many open source packages like the QGIS to understand the transition probabilities and also to make a predicted map of the forest cover. There are many steps are involved, and once whoever is interested, they can contact us. We'll help you in generating information for your study area. However, in QGIS also you have Molasse model. You can learn very easily by even reading in YouTube, and you can able to generate the predictive modeled outputs for the forest cover. Then recently, the global level experts have identified the dynamic habitat indices are the major proxies in identifying and reporting a change in ecosystem level or the landscape level changes in the biodiversity. So in this regard, they identified 3 indices under dynamic habitat indices. One is the cumulative annual greenness. The second one is the minimum annual green cover. And third one is the seasonality. So now by applying this high temporal data, by utilizing the normalized difference vegetation index, we can able to generate the information on cumulative annual greenness. So that is an indicator for the annual productivity, and we can able to generate a map of the minimum annual green cover that provides us the areas which are retaining the minimum level of the green cover on an annual scale. Then the seasonality that will give the information on the seasonality perspective. So you can able to identify like the variations of like evergreen, semi-evergreen, and a deciduous nature in the vegetation. So the studies have proven that this dynamic habitat indices is a proxy for the available energy hypothesis, environmental stress hypothesis, and the environmental stability hypothesis. So it is not that we can only apply in the field of biodiversity. So we can make use of this type of data in also in agricultural sector and also other natural resources analysis. But the studies have proven that these are the indices are having a direct correlation with species richness, productivity, and the habitat condition. So how these images are helping is once you have the 1 year data, later you have the high temporal data from the different years from the past. So you can make use of those data sets and generate a trend. So these are the maps shows the trend in dynamic habitat indices. So one is like the annual greenness trend in the Similipal Biosphere Reserve in Orissa. So this is clear that the majority of the areas are showing the improvement in the green cover. So it means the forest department was very much successful in conservation of the forest, and also the local communities, people are also helping in restoration of the forest. Then the minimum annual green cover trend. It is also now showing that based on the like 10 years data, it is also showing that the majority of the areas are showing the improvement in a minimum green cover at an annual scale. So it means the pixels are now showing year after year, there is an increasing of the minimum value of the vegetation at the pixel level. Then the seasonality trend. So because of the this anthropogenic pressures or the deforestation or degradation, is there any change in the type of the vegetation? Say like if the seasonal trend shows the negative side, it means the evergreen forests are now converting into a deciduous type of vegetation. So this is some kind of a proxy in understanding the changes in vegetation as well as the biodiversity at the ecosystem level. Now coming to address the delineation of the forest types. In India, we have 16 major forest types, and all these 16 major forest types to be quantified and to be mapped, it is very difficult task because the majority of the forest ecosystems are remote in place, are inaccessible, and the sampling efforts may not able to provide, or even inventory efforts may not able to provide a one date output or single year output, because it needs the many resources, many lot of manpower as well as cost in carrying out the field exercise. But by applying some field inventory data, then by utilizing this multi-sensor remote sensing data, we can able to map the distribution of the different vegetation types. Because these forest types have, because each forest type is very unique with reference to the structure, composition, as well as the phenology. So by applying the different kind of data sets and by applying the ecological rule basis, we can able to delineate the different forest types. So like the wet evergreen forest, the majority of the vegetation retains leaf throughout the year, and this forest type is structurally very complex. Then like if you see the dry deciduous forest, the majority of the vegetation will shed the leaf during summer. So that is one indicator to differentiate the dry deciduous forest from the other forest types. Similarly, if you see this mountain or Himalayan forest types, there by applying the by utilizing this elevation data and by applying also the climatic data sets, we can able to separate this mountain ecosystems from the other forest types. So here we need to follow some standardized protocols in separation of the different forest types. So this is the one map shows the distribution of various forest types as well as the distribution of land cover in South Asia and the Myanmar. So this map clearly shows that the agriculture is the predominant land cover, which is almost distributed the majority of the South Asia. Like if you see like in Afghanistan, the dominant class here is the desert kind of vegetation. So you have mostly barren land as well as the thorn forest areas. Whereas like if you are coming towards the Northeast India, Eastern Himalayas and Myanmar, you have more of high rainfall, and so the type of vegetation is mostly like the mountain vegetation or the wet evergreen type of forest. So this is the one understanding we can able to generate by utilizing a remote sensing imagery. Now, very recently, in like last year, July 2021, the researchers they published the global land use land cover maps by utilizing the Sentinel-2 data and by applying the deep learning techniques. They have mapped the entire land use land cover of the world. They have applied the 6 bands of the Sentinel-2, like visible blue, green, red, near infrared, and 2 shortwave infrared bands in separation of the different land cover categories. And they have mapped the land cover at 10-meter resolution. So this is a very unique attempt which was now possible by applying the deep learning models and by utilizing the source like the Google Earth Engine. So like just by having a training sample of the 20,000 sites and by using the Google Earth Engine and the artificial intelligence, they could able to generate the map of land use and land cover at 10-meter resolution. And as if our interest is to understand the ecosystem productivity phenology, then there is a role of the phenological metrics is very prominent. There we can able to generate the 15 phenological metrics. So by having this, even this 15 phenological metrics also, we can able to generate the maps at the level 1 in separating the different phenological classes. And this is also become one important information to address that the impact of the climatic variability or the impact of the climate change on the this phenological variations. So this is now was only possible from the 2016 onwards, after having the Sentinel-2 series of satellites, which provides the data at every 5-day interval with the 10-meter resolution. And another important application of the remote sensing in forestry is the understanding the scenario of the forest fragmentation. So you know that the forest has a different kind of the spatial arrangement depending on like the islands, coast, plains, mountains. But the anthropogenic pressures like the replacement by the agricultural lands or replacement by the built-up area. So now the natural forests which are contiguous, large in nature, are now becoming highly fragmented. So however, we need to understand the spatial configuration of the forest, and also we need to minimize the human and wildlife conflict, and also we have to improve the areas which are invaded by the alien species, and we need to utilize the many GIS models like least cost path hypothesis in linking of these habitats. So, but the basic information is coming from the forest cover maps, and then by applying the different thresholds as specified in the different packages, for example, like the landscape fragmentation tool. So they can, they are the open source packages. They'll help us in identifying the variation and the different kinds of the structural arrangement of the forest in our study area. So for example, here I'm showing one small snapshot from the Google Earth imagery. So the patch forest means that is a isolated forest. It has no connectivity with the continuous forest. Another forest is like edge forest. Even though it has a connectivity, but it is having the influence of the non-forest, means the agricultural lands from the outer side. Then we have the type of forest known as a perforated forest. It means the forest in the outer periphery is in a continuous mode, but it is having holes or the gaps inside the forest land due to the encroachment or due to the other pressures. So we can able to generate the map of core forest, perforated forest, edge forest, and patch forest. So that will be that will provide a baseline information for the forest departments. So they'll can able to build the corridors, wildlife corridors, and they can able to restore the habitats. And finally, it will help to improve the native vegetation, and also it will improve the reduce the conflicts between the wildlife and human. The another potentiality of the remote sensing is the assessment of the biomass levels and the carbon stocks of the above ground biomass in forest. In our conventional approaches, we'll do some sampling. There we'll collect the data on the circumference of the tree as well as the height of the tree. Then the information which was collected at the plot level, we will try to upscale to the regional scale. There is a lot of uncertainty was involved in this approach because the error propagation may start from the measurement of the girth of the tree and height of the tree. So there is one level of error. Then there are allometric models are available to calculate the tree volume as well as the biomass. But those allometric models may have some kind of uncertainty in addressing the biomass level of the forest. Then the plot size may not be sufficient. It may be we might have done sampling in a high biomass area or sampling in maybe a low biomass area. So again, here we need to take care of the the optimal plot size to cover the different kinds of gradient, like low biomass to high biomass levels in the forest. And also we need to have the strategy before collecting the data. There we have to use like multi-stage sampling methods in identifying the strata at the remote sensing level initially, then identifying the level 2 strata in the field by utilizing the information of the forest canopy density and the vegetation types. Later, by applying all these types of information, will generate the above ground biomass information of the forest. But whatever the information which was possible from the conventional side, it is not possible to upscale to the all types of forest lands. So in this regard, the remote sensing has a major role by providing 3 types of approaches. The first basic level of approaches is known as a stratify and multiply approach. Here we will do the field data collection, and then as already we know the dense forest and open forest, we will do the multiplication by considering this 2 strata only. So we'll like the average plot biomass into a dense forest area or average plot biomass into a open forest area. That will gives one kind of assessment. So then later we can extrapolate it to the regional level to the national level. Then another approach is the direct remote sensing approach. Here again we have to utilize 2 inputs like the field measurements, then the remote sensing. Here we are utilizing the information like the spectral vegetation indices like NDVI. Then we can even make use of the micro remote sensing data sets. They works with the principle of backscattering coefficient. So these are the different parameters to generate the biomass by utilizing the direct remote sensing approach. Here we are not doing any classification like the dense forest and open forest. Here we are using the vegetation indices or the backscattering information in generating the biomass level of the forest. Then the third one is the approach is known as a combine and assign approach. It is a recent approach. It will also again make use of the information of the field measurements through stratified random sampling. Again, it will make use of the multi-sensor remote sensing data and other variables like the climate. So once you have these different parameters from the climate or environment side and the spectral information and field information, there now we have to apply the machine learning algorithms in generating a map of the biomass. So once if you compare these 3 methods, we found that the combined and assign approach is more robust as it is taking care of not only the field and remote sensing data of vegetation types or forest, it is also taking care of many environmental variables in predicting the biomass level of a forest. So this is the very recent approach, and now majority of the research publications are now coming by applying the combined and assign approach. So this is the one map we have generated by utilizing the long-term forest cover change data sets. So this is one map shows the distribution of the above ground biomass carbon stocks for the Indian forest. So the map clearly shows that the high biomass carbon stocks are in Himalayas and the Western Ghats. The semi-arid, arid, and the parts of the Deccan Peninsula having the low biomass carbon stocks. So then, what is the trend? So as already we have the forest cover data sets and multi-source field inventory data, we can able to understand the changes in the forest biomass and the carbon stock level. So this graph clearly shows that, like I said, from 1995 onwards, there is no much loss of the forest area, but the graph shows that there is a decreasing trend of the carbon stocks that indicates that even the forests are like appears same in area wise, but there is a decreasing trend in the stock. Then if you want to have more precise the maps of the biomass carbon stocks, the earlier maps are based on like optical multispectral data or the microwave based remote sensing, but now we have the advantage of having the LiDAR both from aerial as well as from the satellites, and also now we have the terrestrial LiDAR data to have a better understanding on the carbon stocks. And very recently we have compared the three methods, like through destructive testing. Like we have got some samples from the parts of Chhattisgarh and parts of Madhya Pradesh. There we found that some of the trees are going to be felled as part of the management activity. So we have measured the volume and other parameters of the tree before felling and after felling. Then we have scanned the trees with the terrestrial laser scanner, and also we compared the information generated through different approaches. The destructive testing approach will give almost 100% accurate results, because here we have the information at a like a kg level, but once you are applying the allometric equations, because these allometric equations were generated for the trees which may be of a different age and different kind of climate. So the allometric equations which were generated by destructive testing in other ecological regions may not be sufficient. So here you have some uncertainty, but our map generated, the work generated with the terrestrial laser scanner was given more reliable information than allometric methods. And this is again a very recent development which was published in the year 2021. Till 2021, we don't have any high resolution map of the forest canopy height. So this is the map clearly shows the distribution of the height in different forest ecosystems of the world. So as of now, this map is available with 30-meter resolution, and they applied the backed regression tree ensemble model to generate the forest canopy height. And now they are working on next version of the product. They are utilizing the convolution neural networks to improve the forest height modeling accuracy. And then another important application of the remote sensing is to address the disaster management. So we are aware that the fire is disturbance is also considered as a essential climate variable, and it is also the essential biodiversity variable. So it is affecting both climate as well as the biodiversity. The NRSC is providing this service to the Forest Survey of India. In turn, they are providing this information to the different state forest departments. So within after 20 minutes of the satellite pass, we are generating this active fire location data covering entire country, and this will be provided to the state forest departments to stop the forest fires. And it is not that this is having only the importance in the forest fire control and forest fire management, and we can also able to understand the areas which are prone to the fires, and we can able to use this kind of data to assess the ecological damage to the forest, and also we can able to identify the ecosystems which are adapted to the fire and ecosystems which are sensitive to the forest fire. So this is a one strategy there. We can make use of this data for forest fire proneness daily. So this is the 15 years Modi's data product, shows the fire frequency levels in South Asia. So if you see here, like the majority of the regions in like in central India, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, and parts of Tamil Nadu, as well as in Northeast India, the majority of the areas are affected more than 10 years in 15 years of time frame. And this map also identifies the areas which were not affected by fires in like from like 2013 to the recent period. And by applying the spatial statistics tools as well as the spatial, both it will consider like the advanced spatial statistics tools like space-time pattern mining, we can able to identify the clusters of the hotspots, so that will provide is more reliable as well as the input for the better decision. So if you see here, it shows the vegetation fire hotspots in South Asia from 2003 to 2018. But once, if you have this kind of data, our interest is to provide more reliable maps to the natural resource managers. So now we can able to generate this kind of maps. So it will provide the information on like the trends. There we can identify new hotspots, persistent hotspots, diminishing hotspots, new hotspots, or other kinds of categories. So this type of data is useful for the forest management as well as other natural resource management people to address the issue of the fire management. Now coming to the measurement of the biodiversity. As I said, like in earlier, for biomass purpose, we are identifying certain plots and taking the measurement of girth as well as height, and then by applying the allometric equation, we are generating a map of the biomass. Here, my purpose is interest is to identify the variation in biodiversity. So initially, like we worked with the small plots, say like 20 by 20 meter, and found that once you are extrapolating this information at the regional level, you have a lot of bias, maybe identifying like high biodiversity or the low biodiversity, because the small plots always gives the information which may not be sufficient to provide the precise data. So later we found that the 1 hectare plots are more realistic, and they provide the information not only on the compositional diversity, it will also help us in the assessment of the vegetation structure as well as the functional attributes at 1 hectare scale. So again, this type of 1 hectare scale data also useful in identifying the unique locations for the endangered species and the endemic species. And this is one outcome based on our national project on biodiversity characterization. There, more than 50 institutions were involved in generating the maps on vegetation types, forest fragmentation, disturbance index, as well as the biological richness. And this spatial model shows the that how, because it has considered certain principles, like where we have incorporated the ground level information, which provides the information on uniqueness of ecosystem, species richness, as well as the biodiversity value. And the remote sensing provides information on terrain complexity and the disturbance index. So by integrating these parameters as a function of these parameters, we have generated a landscape level biological richness map. Now, the trend is in identifying the community diversity by using the satellite imageries itself. Like in the earlier our national exercise, we have worked with the IRS history data of moderate resolution, and then we have applied the field data and other protocols in generating a map of the biodiversity richness. But now we have the advantage of having hyperspectral remote sensing data and very high spatial remote sensing data. So there we can able to map the communities more precisely, and by utilizing this hyperspectral remote sensing data, we can able to generate the map of the biodiversity for the complete region. So here we have applied the one technique that is known as a spectral variation hypothesis technique. So here we replaced the actual species with actual means the biological species in the ground with the spectral species in the imagery. So finally, the correlation has given a very good result, and we can able to know the distribution of the biodiversity across the regions and across the larger landscapes or the country level. Now, the advantage is also that by having this very high resolution images, we can able to detect the number of trees, and also we can able to map the tree crown area. The two approaches were very popular. One is the local maximum filtering. The second one is the image binarization. And now you have the one open source package that we can able to insert in the QGIS, that is known as a tree density calculator. So that is a small package that will help us in identifying the tree detections by using the spectral local maximum filtering. Then image binarization is a little bit advanced. Here the image was converting from gray level to the black and white image, where white pixels represent objects of interest and black pixels represent the general background. And there are many algorithms for there available, like region growing as well as the watershed segmentation. Then coming to the modeling, because the majority of the species are now under threat, so we need to restore them into a typical similar habitats. So in this regard, the species distribution models or bioclimatic envelope model or habitat suitable models are helpful in identifying the suitable environment for the rare species or the endangered species. And that is also not only helpful in identifying suitable environment for the rare species, and also we can able to identify the areas which are under risk due to the invasive species. And again, this is the one recent attempt by Dupergo et al. They have utilized the 30 centimeter resolution data to identify the and to detect the elephants in South Africa. And they have got very reliable result, and they suggested that we can make use of this very high resolution imageries in counting of the elephants. This is again the approach. There we have applied the maximum entropy maxent model to generate a potential habitat of the lantana camera. The lantana camera is one of the top 10 invasive alien species, which is affecting the biodiversity of all the native habitats. So one need to identify the suitable habitats and risk areas based on this kind of models. So the people who are involved in conservation, they can utilize these models and they can prevent the introduction of this type of invasive species into a local environment. And the directions. The remote sensing is not a typical science. We can say it is a multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary nature. It will take the information from like geography, engineering, and other scientific disciplines. And as there are many advances for the last 20-50 years, they are very phenomenal. And now the advantage is that we have not only aircrafts and satellites, now we have the UAVs. They provide the information from like space level to the ground level. And the recent trend is the integration of the LiDAR data in satellite, aerial, as well as UAV platforms. And finally, this multi-sensor data provides the opportunity to characterize a different phenomena related to the biodiversity. And as now trend is application of the Google Earth Engine and also application of various machine learning tools and deep learning tools to address the various challenges. And but still there is a rapid development in this field that will provide the necessary inputs for the research as well as for conservation. However, as to address all the global level challenges, now this is a era of collaborative research and applications. Thank you very much.